Services Academy Board and has consulted on and worked with numerous campaigns and businesses on messaging, marketing, and advertising strategies. Tory is also the political director for the North Pinellas Regional Chamber of Commerce and is an officer in the Florida Army National Guard. Ladies and gentlemen, Tory Perfetti. Tory, one more thing. No, you get it in. All right, if you don't have the way we're going to do this is Tory's going to come speak and then James Taylor's going to come speak. And at the end of that, we're going to have questions. And the way the questions are going to work is you all should have a postcard, one of these, an index card, thank you. An index card on your chair. If you don't have one, let me know. We'll get you 1 or 2 or 3, right? You're going to write down your questions, and then we're going to collect them, and we'll ask the questions back and forth. We want it to be a question. We don't want it to turn into a dissertation on why you support or oppose. Okay? So we're going to do that. All right. Let me go fire this machine up. Tory, you can introduce yourself and go from there.
Can everybody hear me? Oh, good. Okay. I'm very honored to be here, and I'm trying to keep it very casual because I think it's very important that all my cards are on the table. And by that, and you're going to see this in the PowerPoint, I want all of you to use your own eyes and ears to understand exactly what this fight is. And further, I thank you for having me, and I appreciate everything that you guys have done. I know how hard the 912ers, Tea Party individuals, libertarians, and the room conservatives work on certain issues. I've been a lifelong conservative and a Republican. I always like to say when people say, well, how long is that? And I say, well, before I was born. And I'm very, very honored to be here. Before the actual amendment kicks off, we all know that people disagree, groups disagree. So on tonight's issue, I'm going to give you some different understanding of what has happened from both sides and our response to this. So I want you to understand where we may be in complete and total disagreement with individual groups or people opposing this, but doesn't necessarily mean that we discount what these individuals or groups have done on other issues. So I want you to have that in mind as you hear everything I say tonight. Thank you. Next slide. And the thing's broken, so I gotta, when you see me do that, don't let that interrupt, but I gotta have him do the next power slide. So basically, next slide. What's happening is, what is Floridians for Solar Choice? Floridians for Solar Choice is an umbrella group. We're a group that has a multi-partisan lean. What does that mean? It means we have people from the right, the left, the center, and business. These individual groups, which you can see up here, being a 912 group, people on the right that are with us, Conservatives for Energy Freedom, Florida Retail Federation, Florida Solar Energy Industries Association, Florida Alliance for Renewable Energy, both of those are business groups that represent pretty much most of the solar companies in Florida. Not outside of Florida, but in Florida. Small businesses and some medium-sized businesses. You've got the Christian Coalition of America, Republican Liberty Caucus of Florida, Libertarian Party of Florida, and of course Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, not a conservative group, but one of the liberal groups, environmental groups that is part of this as well, and then the Tea Party Network, and one group that is not up here on the right is the Republican Liberty Caucus of Tampa Bay. So Floridians for Solar Choice created and is pushing the amendment. The amendment, in its layman's terms, is designed to allow for you and I to enter into a contract and have a solar company front the cost of an installation of your solar panels on your personal home or business, and then allow me to further buy that energy from that solar company. Very simple. The second part of the amendment is it further allows, and we'll take the example of a Publix strip center. If that Publix enters into a contract with a solar company, and that solar company installs the panels on the Publix strip center, and Publix then buys its energy through that solar company, if the amendment passes, excess energy with which Publix generates can then sell it to its contiguous retail property. So if you've got 12 retail vendors in that Publix property, the excess they have and they generate, they can then pass that along, that cost savings, to its retail tenants. Third, this also takes into effect for apartment complexes. So an apartment complex can also then enter into a contract and allow for the buying of energy from that solar company. And then, of course, pass the savings on to its individual tenants. There are no mandates in this ballot initiative anywhere. There are no subsidies, and there are absolutely nothing to do with tax increases or shifting funds. And you're going to hear me say that a few times, and you're going to be able to read that for yourself. Next slide. So, this is the exact regulation that Florida has currently. Because people always ask the question, why would we need this? Florida is one of 5 states in the entire United States currently today that expressly, by law, prohibits you and I from conducting commerce. I want you to think about that. One of 5 states that by law prohibits you and I from entering into a contract with a small business, medium business, or any size business and buying that energy. Prohibits me from entering into a contract with a solar company and buying that energy directly. One of 5 states. That is the actual law itself. Now, there's 2 things that come into play. One is called PW Ventures. That's a court ruling which further, what you would call infuse this ruling. But you can see who is allowed to sell energy. Only public utilities are allowed to sell energy directly to customers. You can all click this up yourself. Florida statute title, I believe that would be 27, chapter 366. So nothing was invented. This is not my opinion. This is not my attempt to argue and say, well, you know, Florida technically can't do it. It's right there. Next slide. This is a map. Those darkest colored states are our brothers in outlawing commerce. Right there. Florida is one of 5. However, I will make the statement, due to a very successful fight going on in Georgia, we might soon be one of only 4 states, as Georgia's Republican-led legislature is leading the fight there to open up their market as well. What you're going to see, and people do like to say, is, well, Florida is one of 5 states, but what about some of the other states? The white states, status is considered unclear, which means it hasn't necessarily been tested. What does that mean in layman's terms? It means that at the moment, no one's really pushed the boundary too much there. So the state legislature, or what you will, utility fund monopolies, haven't pushed themselves in there and said, oh, no, we're going to make that illegal here too. Right there, one of 5 states. Next slide, please. So, you've heard about individual groups that have opposed this. You've got Heartland Institute, AFP, and you've got Faith and Freedom Coalition. And I've also described, of course, who's with us. But many people are making a large amount of assumptions regarding one institute saying, oh, there's something wrong here. For those of you not familiar with Hillsdale College, it's conservatives' version of Harvard. Their economics chair, Charles Steele, the initiative is a great idea. It would open the market to competition and give more energy at lower prices. These new technologies should be allowed to compete freely in the market. They should not be subsidized, but neither should they be hamstrung for the sake of protecting older, established firms. Hillsdale College's economics chair has read the initiative and has written this about it. Next slide, please. A lot of people make discussions, and I try not to get into this battle because we're not talking about efficiency of solar. And I want you to remember that because you're going to hear people say, well, solar can't compete. Solar is not efficient. Solar doesn't do this. Look, that's not my decision to make that argument. It's all of you. It's all of us. We determine that. The free market determines that. If there's demand, a supply gets developed, we buy it. If solar is going to fail, let the market determine that. Let us determine it. You don't legislate something out of existence because you don't think that it can function correctly. You allow the market to determine what's going to happen. This, however, is just a quick example. In 04, that's your average photovoltaic system prices. You can see third quarter 2014, that's how far they're coming down. Why? Because when you allow, as certain states have, technology, incentives, entrepreneurialism, and the free market to take hold, what happens? You reduce prices, you increase efficiency. It's a very common sense process. We all understand it. People remember cell phones in the room? How expensive they were back in 1980? Well, guess what? Cell phones are technology. Now most people have them, what, $30 a month, $40 a month? Mine's $40 a month for Metro. I remember 10 years ago, I couldn't have got a $40 a month phone with unlimited texting and long distance calls anywhere in the US. Same thing happens with other technologies that are allowed to flourish within the free market. Next slide, please. This is how many people are employed today compared, as of 2013, compared to '06. A lot of us like to discuss, what about jobs in America? For those of you who follow job creation, a lot of the jobs that we're creating are what are considered service industry. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I've worked at McDonald's, I've mowed lawns. Having a job is a good thing. But America isn't about having a job. America is about having an industry, an economy that fits what we want to have for a better future. So you have service industry too. But America used to be a manufacturing powerhouse. Many of these solar jobs, many of these are very, very good paying. You're talking $40,000 at a minimum in certain cases, up to $40, $50, $60 an hour. Depending on where you are, between 20 and 30% of those jobs can be manufacturing. And these are American jobs, not outsourced. You open the markets, we're going to be developing it here. Next slide, please. So you all have this on your chair. This is just a quick constitutional amendment petition form. Next slide, please. And you can take that out, and I want you to read it. I want you to read it because it's very transparent. Your own eyes will see there's no mention of subsidies anywhere in this valid amendment. Not one place where your eyes see the word subsidies anywhere, or mandates, or the shifting of funds, or tax increases. So here's what's happened. When people say, well, not that much support for this, in about 32 days, we had over 100,000 individuals willing to put their signature to paper. Willing to put their signature to paper. And we didn't go around and say, are you a Democrat? Sign it. Are you a Republican? Sign it. We said, would you like to sign this? Over 100,000 in right about 32 days signed their name to a piece of paper to open up the free market in the Sunshine State. The amount of popularity that we have seen has been extraordinary across the board. People understand who read the issue that what we're talking about is not mandating anybody do anything, but giving you the chance to open up the market, giving us individual freedom of choice. You'll see right there, it says 67,900 signatures have thus far been counted. Why is this important? You need 10% of the signatures that you have to get in order to get it to the Supreme Court. That number, by the way, as of 5 o'clock this evening, was 72,000. We have now made the number qualified to get it to the Attorney General's office, to then have it transported to the Supreme Court, to have them rule on the ballot language itself, to put it on the ballot for 2016. So 72,000, so we're over the mark. The next step is we have to continue collecting signatures, a little over 700,000 for making sure that we can get 683, 149. Next. So, here's that part where I was telling you, well, sometimes we can agree with groups on certain issues, sometimes we don't. And I have to address this because it's been brought up. So, as I mentioned, we have what's happening here with this issue. You're going to hear a lot of people, maybe even tonight, say this initiative will lead to subsidies, or this initiative has mandates. And as I said, go ahead and read it. You can see it. But no conservatives in this coalition have endorsed mandates. You will find no quotes from us. You will find no quotes of any of those of us that you can see speaking publicly saying that we're supporting subsidies for an industry. There is nothing ever that you can see in this amendment that says subsidies. Now, opponents say we want to pick winners, prop up the solar industry, and expand government subsidies and mandates. You hear this a lot. Don't pick winners and losers. Well, the problem is, Florida already did pick its winner, and they're called utility, government-owned, and sponsored monopolies. So government of Florida has already picked your winner, ladies and gentlemen. How did they do that? By outlawing commerce regarding the energy market. By only allowing you to purchase your energy through one source, and then guaranteeing that source between 10 and 11% ROI, a rate of return. That's right. These government-funded utility monopolies are also guaranteed a profit in the state of Florida. All of you are paying for it. And all of you only have one choice but to buy through them. So Florida has picked a winner. What we're doing with this amendment is saying, allow for more options. I'm a common sense guy. I'm trying to think to myself, how is that me picking a winner? That sounds like I'm trying to open up the market from the already currently picked winner. I mean, you guys know this. You've been on political issues, you see it. So AFP told conservatives that radical environmentalists and Tom Steyer are funding this initiative. We are a political action committee, Floridians for Solar Choice. You can go and publicly look up where our money came from initially. SACE, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, which is a group on the left, an environmental group, put in all the initial funding for this issue. But here's the thing. I will, and I said this publicly, take money from any side that gives it to me based on this amendment. And why is that? Because in Florida, when you do an amendment, this language can never change. This language that you're reading now cannot change. If Al Gore flies in here on his private plane, gives me $100 million, can't change the value. Rush Limbaugh gives me the same $100 million and flies in on his private plane, can't change the language. So yes, we have gotten money, and obviously, when you see the word solar, you're going to have liberals, environmental individuals who want to support something like this. But we are raising money, and we'll be continuing to raise money from all sides. We have not lied about it. We've been open and transparent about it. You cannot change this language no matter what happens. And I welcome anybody's support for this. Because this amendment, you as a Republican, as a conservative, as a Democrat, as a liberal, as a non-affiliate, do not have to give up your convictions to support this. Next slide, please. So there aren't any regulatory barriers in place blocking solar in the state of Florida. I've already mentioned to you, Florida is one of 5 states in the entire nation where you and I cannot conduct commerce. That sounds like a pretty big regulatory barrier. You and I can't enter into a contract if I decide to, if you decide to, and buy your energy from that solar company. That sounds like a huge barrier. I want you to think about what that means. Take solar out of this for just a second. And think about if Mercedes-Benz, before there's some journalists here, I do like Mercedes, I'm not picking on them, but I have to use quote comment. Say if Mercedes-Benz came down to Florida, had the legislature pass a law that said none of you can buy a car from any other car company at all in the state of Florida. And then further, had a law passed that allowed them to collect taxpayer dollars to build manufacturing and production facilities, whether or not they function. And by here I'm talking about the Duke power plant all of us are paying for without cost recovery whatsoever, and the plant will never be built. And then further, Mercedes got a guaranteed 10 to 11% profit. So forget about the word solar. Put that in there. How would you all feel right now about what a regulatory barrier is if that one car company said you could only buy from them? Now take Mercedes out of that and put solar back into it. That's exactly what's happening in this state. So, the initiative will prop up solar energy. Well, everybody in here understands what the free market means. With no mandates telling anybody to buy it, it means the free market will determine whether or not it succeeds. How does that happen? Simple. Economics 101, supply and demand. You ready? There's demand, supply rises to meet it. If there's too little supply, price goes up. A lot of supply, price goes down. No demand, no product. What happens to solar? If nobody wants it, if it's not efficient, if it's not successful, nobody buys it. But why would you legislate an industry out of existence? That's not American. Next slide, please. So, the initiative will lead to higher rates. This is absolutely, completely false. This has been banded around continually, despite being disproven over and over and over again. AFP made a claim in Georgia saying rates would go up by 40%. Georgia's PSC, which mind you, is an elected body, as opposed to ours, which is appointed. Georgia PSC members run for their seat. They take their views to the people and explain to them what they want to do with your energy future. Georgia's PSC has called this patently false. Georgia Power has currently said, and I've got a nice quote from there, rates haven't gone up. Solar prevents rates because you don't have to continue to build new power plants. Why? Logically, you're putting less strain on the system. But what happens when a utility can't build new power plants because there isn't as much demand to continue building them, well, guess what? Every time government-sponsored utilities in Florida build a power plant, they make money. I hate to boil this down to protecting a profit, but look, you can read the amendment yourself. We all know what happens when a monopoly starts to get competition, right? It has to get better at what it does. But if there is no competition, the monopolies get lazy. They don't have to compete. They see this as an attack on their profit model. The initiative is a handout and expands subsidies. Okay, so first, the number 30% gets thrown around a lot. That's a federal subsidy, ladies and gentlemen. That 30% number that people keep talking about that leads to subsidies for solar companies, that's a federal subsidy. Federal government passed a law giving 30% subsidies. However, interestingly enough, that subsidy is no longer 30% by the end of 2016. The Liberty First Network analyzed the initiative and found that it does not include nor promote subsidies. Next slide. This is the Liberty First analysis. I would suggest you click it up on Google, Liberty First Network. You can find their analysis. Found no mandates, no subsidies. Next slide, please. Why all the false claims? Well, how do you fight something that's free market and you don't have an argument against it? You have to put out false facts. And that's a false fact. What's a false fact? Well, a false fact is something that you say loud enough a lot of times to get people to believe it. That's a false fact, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't make it true, it just means you said it a lot. That 30% federal tax credit expires December 36, 2016. This initiative, if voted in, doesn't take effect to January 3rd, 2017, which means solar will have to survive on its own. Next slide, please. This is basically the same stuff I've been saying. There's no extra strain on the grid. This is about freedom of choice, ladies and gentlemen. No subsidies, no mandates. Next slide, please. All right, this was a study just done by Politifact, and you can read it. I gave it to you. It's on your chair. You'll see all the sources they used. They called, AFP Florida said solar policies in Georgia have resulted in rate hikes and did not result in solar becoming any more economically viable. The statement was rated completely wrong. Pants on fire. You can see the sources, which are in the handouts you have. They talked to Georgia Power and the Georgia PSC, which participated in that study. Next slide, please. This is Georgia PSC Commissioner Bubba McDonald. Total foolishness. We have no state subsidies, and there has been no upward pressure on rates. If anything, it's held down the cost of fuel. They can come down to Florida and blow all the smoke they want, but don't you believe it. Next slide. This is their other commissioner, Tim Eccles. Georgia is one of those states that resisted passing a renewable portfolio standard. We pride ourselves on being market-driven. We project downward pressure on rates from solar. Next slide, please. Utilities, just so anybody doesn't understand that it's not just solar that gets subsidies, the entire economic market of America has subsidies and tax credits. Utilities get billions in subsidies for power plants. Duke customers pay for a nuclear plant that wasn't built and another that broke down, and we still haven't received our funds back. New nuclear in Georgia and South Carolina is also federally subsidized. Does it make it right? No. However, the argument that only solar gets subsidies is ridiculous. Next slide. And this was on AFP's website. We do not support repeal of Georgia's Territory Act. That's their same version of a non-compete act. It's their same version of Florida's. Only Florida utilities can sell energy. So basically, that's a little PowerPoint to address some of the claims made. My appeal to all of you is to read the amendment and understand what we're actually talking about. We're talking about the free market being able to take hold. We're talking about individual choice. We're talking about the ability of you and I to enter into a contract, which means conduct commerce. You can read in the amendment for yourself. There are no mandates whatsoever in there and no subsidies. Further, I want you to understand exactly what it means when you say you're a free market conservative. And again, I want you to picture if this amendment didn't have solar in it, and we had something else in there, and commerce was being blocked, how quick would we as conservatives be to support it? I don't want you to hear solar and automatically be standoffish. I want you to hear exactly what it does, which is free market, individual choice. That's what I want you to hear. I want to thank every one of you again for having me here. I really appreciate it. It's an honor, and I hope every one of you will have questions for me. I will be here for a long time, even after the session ends. Thank you, and God bless.
Mark turned those lights back on because he knows I'm old and I can't see. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. By the way, I believe that a round of applause is in order for Mark Rosenbaum, who has just recently been selected as the vice chair of the Tampa 912 project. Mr. Mark Rosenbaum.
And how about our new secretary?
And our new secretary. Karen. Actually, Kathy, thank you for reminding me, because I forgot who the secretary was. And in our minutes, when I went to ask for the minutes, I forgot who to ask. Karen Jarosh is the secretary of the Tampa 912. And I think we welcomed our other board members, didn't we? Did we ever properly welcome the other board members? Kathy Brown was re-elected as a board member, and help me? And Chris Castellano. Very good. All right, so much for housekeeping. Thank you very much. All right, our next speaker is like Tory, is a local guy. However, for those of you all who know about Chicago, you know that Chicago is in tough shape. And so they successfully stole James Taylor away from us. But they need him really bad right now. So, James Taylor is the vice president at the Heartland Institute, a national public policy organization whose mission is to discover, develop, and promote free market solutions to social and economic problems. He's also an adjunct scholar and policy advisor for the James Madison Institute. James was a primary author of Texas Governor Rick Perry's National Energy Plan when Governor Perry ran for the presidency in 2012. James is a primary author of Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal's America Next Energy Plan that Governor Jindal released this past September. He's also advised 2016 presidential candidate Ted Cruz. I don't know how he knew that Ted Cruz was already going to be a presidential candidate. He's got some kind of special insight, apparently, since he just announced it the other day. Advised presidential candidate Ted Cruz, his top staff on energy and environment issues. James writes a regular column on free market energy and environment issues for Forbes.com. He served as communications director for the free market website Florida Media Trackers. He also hosted the WGUL weekly radio program Inside Florida Politics. Mr. Taylor has discussed free market energy and environmental policy on Fox News, CNN, CBS, and The Blaze, and many other national television networks. I was going to make some kind of comment about the other minor TV stations, MSNBC, or whatever they are anyway. He's been interviewed on air by Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, Neil Cavuto, Stuart Varney, Laura Ingraham, Mark Levin. He's been published and quoted in just about every major newspaper in the country. He also makes regular appearances on many national conservative talk radio programs. Mr. Taylor's lived in the Tampa Bay area for most of the past 20 years and has been a frequent guest speaker several times here at the Tampa 912 Project. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. James Taylor.
Well, thank you, Tim, for the very kind introduction. It seems like just yesterday we were going back to back on WGUL. Tim, Mark, and Karen had a fantastic program. I tried to glom off of their glory and have my own program on the same afternoon, but I think that I paled in comparison to the quality of you three. And we all owe the three of you another round of applause for all the work you do. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank everybody that's here tonight and that shows up each and every week. Giving up your evenings, that's giving up quite a bit for the cause of liberty. And it seems like just yesterday that I was here giving a presentation on HB 7117. And of course, I recognize my friends and neighbors here in the 912 project. 7117, as you recall, was the Florida law that gave $100 million in Florida taxpayer subsidies to the renewable energy industry. And here at the Tampa 912 project, quite a few folks rallied to let folks understand what was really going on. And although that bill became law, nevertheless, our voices were heard in Tallahassee. Don't let anybody ever tell you that you being here, you showing up, well, I said Monday, and it's Tuesday, the days blend together. Don't let anybody tell you that you showing up on a Tuesday evening, on a Saturday, volunteering your time makes no difference, because it makes a ton of difference. It did on 7117. We caught the attention of people in Tallahassee. And I hope we'll catch the attention of people in Tallahassee on every single issue that is dear to the hearts of free markets and liberty. So thank you so much. Now, I mentioned 7117 and the renewable power subsidies. And it strikes me as quite interesting that here we are talking about another special carve-out for renewable power. Now, before we get to the actual amendment itself, I think it's really important that we take a look at the solar power industry. I mean, this is the beneficiary of the amendment. These are the folks that are pushing the amendment. Now, I travel around the country every week throughout the year. I meet with legislators, I meet with governors, with congressmen, I participate in town hall meetings, I testify in hearings. And it's really interesting because every time that I'm in one of these settings, standing up for free markets, if the solar power industry is there as well, they are always the folks that are saying, no, 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 not at all. They're the folks that are pushing for the big government crony programs to keep them afloat. They're the folks that ridicule and belittle us and our free market beliefs and say you can't listen to those folks, they're crazy. Free markets don't work. We need the government to step in and give everybody a seat at the table. That's what they say 99.99% of the time. I say that because I can't think of a single instance, but there might be one. Maybe someone will show me one. That's who they are. Now, why do they advocate that? The answer is very simple. Solar power can't pay for itself. Without government intervention, the industry would not exist. I have nothing against solar power. I would love to see solar power someday be cost competitive, and I'll be the first person to buy solar power products. When I built my house in Manatee County, I wanted to have a solar heater on my pool. I found out, however, that, well, in the summer I don't really need it. In the winter it doesn't warm the pool enough. On the edge of the seasons, it might warm the pool about 6 degrees by the end of the day if it's sunny. And it would cost me 3 or 4 times up front what it would cost me to get a heat pump. I got a heat pump. I'd love to see solar competitive. Now, why do they need these government subsidies and mandates? Well, first of all, the extent to which they do push for these programs. Do you know that most of the states in this country, people do not have a choice? State law requires them to purchase a certain percentage of their power from renewable power sources, including solar. In fact, in many of those states, within the renewable power mandate, solar power has its own carve-out among the carve-outs. And when I testify in state legislatures and say, you know, this really isn't a good idea. People should have freedom of choice. They're the folks who fight tooth and nail. They're the folks who scream and cry bloody murder and fight against free markets. Why do they want their market share carve-out? Why do they need a market share carve-out? The simple fact is it's too darn expensive. People say we're the sunshine state, so we should be promoting it. The sun shines for free. Well, yeah, but solar power is very diffuse. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of expensive equipment to get just a little bit of workable electricity from the sun. And I'll give you an example. I was in New York last month. New York City is the rat capital of the world. And guess what? Rats run around Manhattan for free. And we know how we can put those rats on little treadmills and little circles and bring them up to a turbine, and guess what? They can produce electricity. So I can go to New York and say, hey, we're the rat capital of the world. Why shouldn't we be promoting rat electricity? Because it's too darn expensive. Rats run around for free, but it's too expensive. Now, I much prefer Florida sun to New York City rats. Believe me, that's why I've been here for 20 years. But that doesn't mean that we should be engaging in foolish programs to prop up an industry that doesn't pay for itself. How expensive is solar power? Well, the Brookings Institution, that's a left-of-center public policy organization. They support liberal causes. They generally support renewable power. They released a study last year. They reported that solar power is 3 times more expensive than conventional power. Every unit of solar power in your electricity bill, your rate is 3 times higher than it otherwise would be. Now that's the Brookings Institution. The US federal government, the Energy Information Administration, not a left of center organization. They report, we see a chart about how solar prices are coming down. So they said, let's look at the future. Solar power that's being built in 2016 next year, over the lifespan of the equipment, looking out 20, 30 years, they report even for that, solar power is going to be 5 times more expensive than conventional power. Every unit of solar power that is added to your bill makes your electricity prices go up 5 times as much. Now, we're also told that, well, the reason for that is, well, solar power doesn't get much subsidies. Some of the other folks get subsidies. Well, that's not true either. According to the federal government, the US Energy Information Administration, renewable power receives 3 times as much subsidies as conventional power. Solar power alone receives more subsidies than all fossil fuel sources combined. And if you look at it by subsidy per amount of electricity generated, you're looking at renewable power receiving 25 times more subsidies than fossil fuels. That's the long and short of it. Now, Tory mentioned the 30% federal subsidy. Every time a solar power piece of equipment is manufactured and put into use, you're paying 30% of that. Now, that's across the board. Then there are specially targeted programs, Solyndra, etc. That's more on top of that. In most states, there are state subsidies. In many localities, there are municipal subsidies. And even with all those subsidies, they can't compete unless they have special market carve-outs. That's why they have the renewable power mandates. And by the way, that 30% federal subsidy that's supposed to sunset in 2016, yeah, the wind power sunset subsidy was supposed to sunset in 2008, 2009, 2010. It's still there. Each and every year, the wind power folks go to Congress and say, extend our subsidy, and they get it. You don't think the solar folks will do the same? I hope Tory will be there in 2016 and be advocating strongly to sunset that subsidy. But the solar power folks are going to push for it tooth and nail, and I bet you they'll get it. But the point is, there's a reason why the solar power folks fight so hard for their subsidies. They cannot exist without them. They're against everything we stand for. They call me names in hearings. They belittle what we stand for. They want big government on their side. Now let's get to this particular amendment. It's really important when you look at the amendment. Right in the very first sentence, you'll see this is an open-ended mandate that will forever be a part of our Constitution, regardless of what technologies do, regardless of what the economics do. It says that it's the policy of the state of Florida to, quote, encourage and promote solar power. Think about that. Our Constitution, the framework of liberty in our state, which is supposed to be the overarching document from which the interstitial laws are filled in. It's the policy of the state to encourage and promote. That's amazing. I mean, hopefully our legislators in Tallahassee will see through that, but at least if we're going to have these subsidies, that's where it belongs, in Tallahassee. That's not a constitutional issue. The Florida Constitution is not set up so that every special interest group can go to the government trough and demand their share. That's what this is. Notice how it's so open-ended. Encourage and promote. Now, the folks, the attorneys who wrote this up on behalf of the solar power industry, they could have chosen any language they wanted to. They left that open-ended for a reason. Because once this gets passed, they're going to go to their friends in the courts, and every time they don't get a new subsidy and a new market share mandate, they go to the courts, to their liberal friends in the Florida Supreme Court, and they're going to say, look, it's in the Constitution. The people have spoken. The Constitution says the government must encourage and promote subsidies. And these legislators in Tallahassee won't do it. So you judges intervene. That's a frightening concept to me. Also, when you look at the specific provisions regarding this market share carve-out, notice the language there. It doesn't say we're going to allow FPL and Duke Energy to compete for your dollar. It doesn't say we're going to allow any utility to form and compete. It doesn't break up any monopolies. It doesn't open anything up. It doesn't say on a small-scale basis that wind power, biomass, hydro, you name it, can compete to sell power directly to you. It doesn't. It gives solar power its own piece of the government monopoly. That's all it does. It doesn't break up anything. It doesn't open up markets. The solar power industry says, hey, look at this. This is a good thing that the utilities got. I want my piece. But let's make sure wind power doesn't get a choice, doesn't get a chance at it. Let's make sure biomass doesn't get a chance at it. Let's make sure the utilities themselves can't compete. In fact, what would happen if the amendment allowed for competition among utilities? This would be the worst nightmare for solar power. Because if Duke Energy and FPL and any other utilities formed to compete, they wouldn't be having any solar power in their mix because their costs would be too high and they'd have to compete. The monopoly system is what the solar power industry needs and promotes and is not breaking up. And the moment they get this extra carve out, they're going to fight even harder to keep it in place. What's the practical effect for you and me? Remember those subsidies that we talked about, that Tory mentioned, that I mentioned? Now, if you put solar power equipment on your roof, that means everybody else in this room is paying 30% plus for that. But you know what? At least the subsidy, I'll say at least, it's a silver lining, it's not a good thing. But at least you as an individual, you're the one who's getting that subsidy. Because the subsidy goes to whoever owns the equipment. What does this amendment do? Why does the solar power industry want it so much? Because they want to be able to own the equipment and sell it to you. This is a provision in the Constitution that gives them, and them alone, nobody else, the right to put equipment on your property and then say, no, you don't own it, we own it. It's because they want the subsidies. It's not good enough that there are these massive subsidies in place that distort the markets and encourage people to purchase their product. They want the subsidies in place to go to them too. They want the subsidies to go to them to encourage people to buy their product. That's ridiculous, folks. That's not free market. That's another instance of cronyism, of big industry gamesmanship. One of the things that has been mentioned here, well, the subsidies. It's been said that this is not going to increase subsidies one bit. There's nothing in the language of the amendment that says you're going to get more subsidies. No, but it doesn't have to be in the language of the amendment to make it so. Let's assume for the sake of argument that because they have this new market share carve out, they successfully lobby for more subsidies, and they're able to talk people to put solar power equipment on their roofs. For every new piece of solar power equipment that's built and installed on someone's roof, the subsidies go up. We're paying 30% of that. Our tax bills go up. We have to pay taxes on these things. It may not be in the language of the amendment that, oh, by the way, every time this happens, the people of Florida have to pay 30%, but that doesn't make it disappear. It doesn't make it go away. This is something that is going to prop up, and I'll use that term. You knew I'd use it. It's going to prop up an industry that would not exist but for government favoritism. It's going to give them reach above and beyond what they've already taken. And it's going to even more heavily subsidize them. It's going to even more drive up our tax bills. Folks, if solar power succeeds, I'm all for it. I hope they do. Like I said, I'll be the first one to buy it. I wanted to buy it. It didn't work. But I don't think that you and I should be forced constitutionally to purchase their product or to give them a special piece of the racket that nobody else gets. And that's what they're asking for. You know, I do want to bring up something that disappoints me. I mean, really in my heart. And then I don't know, I'm up here, I don't know what conveys and what doesn't convey. But, people in this room, we know each other. I've spoken here before, I know many of you. And I imagine that there are issues, Karen Jarosh, I love you so much. I really do.
Her husband's sitting right there.
That's right. Karen is so wonderful. Well, I'm not alone. I mean, he's got to fight off 50 people there. But I bet there are at least an issue or two or three that we disagree on. And you and I both love the finer points of finding out what's right and best and just, and we could probably have that discussion. And I would hope that we never call each other names, especially not publicly. To our faces, certainly, but even, especially not publicly. And when I see what's been going on here with this issue, and what's been injected into this discussion and debate, it breaks my heart. I mean, look at these handouts. Here's a title. Fact and Fiction, Understanding Misinformation and Deception, Americans for Prosperity. I mean, all the attacks on Americans for Prosperity in this last presentation, I thought we were here at an MSNBC meeting. I thought we were filming a segment here. We can have a disagreement without vilifying and demonizing people who disagree with us. I don't doubt for a minute that Americans for Prosperity, who are champions of free markets, of limited government, or who are about the only folks who stand up publicly for us and our ideas, that they've reached their opinions for legitimate reasons, as have I. They don't need to be vilified publicly for this. Next one, Koch-backed group says Georgia solar policies cost more. talks about Koch brothers leading us down a dark path. Let me ask you a question. Has anyone in this room ever heard a big government liberal vilifying George Soros publicly? Have you ever heard him vilifying Tom Steyer publicly? No, because you don't eat your own kind. And I guarantee you, and they don't vilify Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid publicly. And I guarantee you there are disagreements among the liberals, among big government liberals on certain issues. But they don't go out and vilify George Soros and Tom Steyer. They don't chastise them and call them names. On the conservative side, I've never heard a conservative vilify Ronald Reagan because they disagree on a finer point, or Scott Walker, or whoever it may be. I don't hear them vilifying Americans for Prosperity who stand up for us. I don't hear conservatives vilifying Charles and David Koch, who are about the only people who will publicly give money to support what you and I believe in. And by the way, Koch brothers don't give me a dime. They can send cigars my way, I'll take it. But the fact of the matter is, there's no place for that in this debate. We can have this disagreement. We can do it without calling each other's names. We can do it without accusing them of lying, lies and deceit. Those aren't any lies. Everything I said is truthful. You may disagree with my conclusion. We can have that discussion. Don't call me a liar. Don't call my friends at Americans for Prosperity a liar. Here's a fundraising letter that I received from Floridians for Solar Choice. The title on their internet is, quote, Koch brothers try to block the sun. Who raises money by vilifying Charles and David Koch? Not conservatives, that's right. I've highlighted some text. Funded by the billionaire Koch brothers. The Koch brothers' many dirty tricks, the dark side. And then can you contribute money? One of the other leaders, the co-leader of Floridians for Solar Choice, on March 17th, the Christian organization, Faith and Freedom Coalition, they looked at the issue. People can come out, you see people on both sides of the issue. You come out with different opinions. They said, we don't support this.
Thank you.
On that very same day, the other person at the head of Floridians for Solar Choice says, quote, I'm disappointed that a group that espouses Christian values would engage in a campaign of lies and deceptions. A campaign of lies and deceptions they just announced. There's no place for that. We can disagree without doing that to each other. I got a letter from that same person, an unsolicited letter who I've never met, never spoken with, threatening me that if I were to publicly also come out in this campaign of lies and deception, that I would be treated publicly the way they treat AFP. Well, gosh darn it, I'm proud to stand by Americans for Prosperity, and I always will be. And just before taking the stage, I had a gentleman here who asked me my opinion on this. So I told him. He said, well, you're wrong. And I said, well, maybe at the end of the evening, you'll have a different opinion. Maybe I will. You always have to keep an open mind. He wouldn't take that for an answer. He said, do you know who I am? You don't want to go to war with me.
You completely.
That's exactly what you said. It's exactly what you
I
said.
did not say that.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about. We can have these differences of opinion without saying these things. Folks, just remember one thing. The folks who are your friends and your backers and your allies will always be that way. And the folks who look to drive you apart, they might be on the right side of the issue. Don't just take my word for it, investigate. But realize where they're coming from, take it with a grain of salt. And I thank you so much for being here, for being advocates of liberty, day in and day out. And I stand with you proudly always. Thank you.
Does anybody have a question?
Okay, here's how we're going to do this, all right? Because we moved along very smartly. And you all can be writing down your questions. Mark and Karen will be circulating. Get your questions and bring them on up. But what I'm going to do now for about 4 or 5 minutes, I'm going to give both Tory and James an opportunity to respond in a civil manner to each other. Because remember what I said about being fiercely independent? we believe what we believe based on what we know, okay? And we arrive at our conclusions on that basis. So, you all will bear with me. Tory?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, to hear somebody say that they don't want to have lies inducted into a conversation, to hear this happen, and to turn this into what you just heard, okay, was the runaround about what actually exists. And I'm absolutely overwhelmingly insulted, especially considering people in this room who know me, who've seen my campaign when I ran, know how conservative I am. I've actually helped with AFP stuff before. I did not start this. I did not go into this. I did not start an AFP campaign. We started our ballot initiative describing exactly what it was. We were then challenged by, yes, and I'm going to stand for this, lies and absolute falsehoods. So I want to point this out to you because I have seen this and heard this and heard this. And it is absolutely ridiculous. And that's true. Let us not vilify our own. Let us not go after our own. I didn't start this. I didn't come out with this. I wasn't the one who put out an entire campaign of falsehoods. So here we go. Here's the actual sentence with which he's talking about. And there's two sentences. It shall be the policy of the state to encourage and promote local small-scale solar-generated electricity and production and to enhance the availability of solar power to customers. Second sentence with actually in the intent. This section is intended to accomplish this purpose by limiting and preventing regulatory and economic barriers that discourage the supply of electricity generated from solar energy sources to customers who consume the electricity at the same or contiguous property as the site of the solar electricity production. What this is doing is saying in legalese, Florida shall encourage and promote what is currently illegal. That is legalese language, ladies and gentlemen. Florida right now, it is illegal for you to buy your energy from a solar company. And absolutely, I would take you up on your offer to fight subsidization of solar. However, it is illegal to see if the free market will allow solar to succeed or not. So you have to write that Florida shall now encourage and promote an industry that is illegal. The second sentence describes exactly what its intent is. Ladies and gentlemen, there is an extraordinary threshold to meet with a constitutional amendment. And in regards to the comments on biomass and biofuels and other energy, Florida and anybody who studies constitutional law or goes and testifies understands we have something called a single subject rule. I cannot include and still potentially survive a Supreme Court ruling all these other subjects inside an amendment. It's a single subject. You cannot go out and say biomass, biofuels, wind, all these other alternatives. That's a constitutional requirement. And as far as inputting into a constitutional amendment that is based on the free market, outlawing subsidies, well, ladies and gentlemen, within Florida's Constitution, do you know who gets to decide appropriations? It's the legislature and the governor. Why would I put inside a constitutional amendment something that wouldn't pass constitutional muster and outlaw the legislature and the governor from acquiring appropriations? You don't put that in there. You would never pass something like that. And who would do that? The legislature is elected by the people. I'm not going to write an amendment that says I'm going to outlaw the legislature from ever writing a law about subsidies ever again. So yeah, it is outright lies. And I absolutely can't believe that it's gotten to where we are here today. Because anybody can read it and you can see it. And as far as not leading to subsidies, look, ladies and gentlemen, if the federal government wants to pass a subsidy and they want to give it to a company, and that company comes down to Florida, I can't outlaw that. None of us can. And all of us better stop eating food, because I'm telling you where subsidies are there. All of us better stop buying cars, better stop building things. I'm not going to micromanage what the federal government does or the state government does. I can't be an arbiter of a subsidization campaign by a legislature. You have to go up there and fight. So it is an absolute, outright, 100% lie to say that this is a mandate, subsidies, and that I started a campaign against AFP and this and that. What you saw were us refuting what was given at a press conference by AFP and then Faith and Freedom. We had never mentioned their names. I had never brought them up. And all of a sudden a press conference comes out and spreading what are absolute falsities.
If I may have a moment. Thank you very much. Well, lies and misdirections and all that stuff. If anything I said is a lie, it's a factual lie, tell me. If you disagree, that's the way, then we're going to disagree. I didn't accuse Tory of lying. I haven't done so. But let's take a look at what he said. He says there is a single issue provision in the Constitution. Basically, it says you can't have a constitutional amendment that says it's going to be part of the Constitution that the government will keep the Tampa Bay Rays in Tampa and they'll keep them from moving, and at the same time we're going to have a 20% tax cut. That single issue provision does not say all utilities may compete. The fact that there may be 3 or 4 utilities doesn't mean it's not a single issue. I think most kindergartners would know that. Okay? Putting in a provision that says all energy sources may sell small-scale power, that's a single issue. Now, again, I guess someone can argue, they can make the argument, I don't think it's going to go very far, that that's more than one issue if there might emerge 3 utilities. But don't call me a liar because I pointed out. The facts are on my side. One other point about this debate. My mic's been cut? There we go. Anyway, one other point about this debate. And this is where, why I think it's important to have all sides participating without gratuitous name calling, without people sending me unsolicited emails telling me I better not dare speak out. The quote that Tory read to you from Charles Steele from Hillsdale College, remember that? Do you know where he got that from? He didn't tell you, but I'll tell you. That was in the Heartland Institute's Environment and Climate News. Now, I'm here speaking on my own behalf. I suspect most people at Heartland agree with me. But you know what? When somebody says, here's an argument for this, I'm not going to call him names. I'm not going to accuse him of lying. I'm not going to vilify him. I'm not going to say anything about, his character. In fact, I'll promote it and report it so that people can understand and hear the issues with a clear mind. And that's what I did, and that's what we did. And I hope that everyone will do that, not just in this issue, but all issues. Let all voices be heard. Give the other side as well. Anyway, I think we're both happy to take it.
Well, and I would also agree, and I have not once
You
mentioned...
rebut, I'll rebut.
Hey, look, I have never once mentioned your name.
We're on the question. All right. So, I love spirited debate. It's so much fun. And it's even more fun when I don't have to be in it. All right. So let's do some questions.